How does a man spend 31 years attending church, raising children, and serving his community, while investigators search desperately for a killer they cannot find? And the answer is sitting in the front pew every Sunday morning. Wichita, Kansas. For 31 years, a city lived in the shadow of a killer who named himself BTK, bind, torture, kill. He murdered 10 people. He taunted police with handwritten letters. He vanished for 13 years. And when he finally made his fatal mistake, it wasn't a witness, a fingerprint, or a surveillance camera that brought him down. It was a floppy disk and a church bulletin. Dennis Lynn Rader was born March 9, 1945, in Pittsburgh, Kansas. By nearly every measure, he was ordinary to the point of invisibility. He served in the Air Force, earned a degree from Wichita State University, and settled into suburban life in Park City, a quiet community just north of Wichita. To those around him, Rader was a pillar of the neighborhood. He served as president of his congregation council at Christ Lutheran Church. He led a Boy Scout troop. He worked as a compliance officer for Park City, the man who knocked on your door if your grass grew too long or your dog's license had lapsed. He was methodical, rule-bound, the kind of person who seemed almost aggressively committed to civic order. He married Paula Dietz in 1971. They had 2 children. Neighbors recalled a man who maintained his lawn with military precision and remembered everyone by name. From the outside, it was a life of absolute normalcy. But inside the house at 6220 North Independence Street, and inside Dennis Rader's mind, something else had been taking shape for years. Rader would later describe what he called a Factor X, a compulsion he claimed he could not control, rooted in violent fantasies that began in childhood. He kept private journals. He constructed what he called projects, detailed plans targeting specific victims. He stalked. He surveilled. He prepared kits. He waited. He gave himself a name for what he did, BTK. January 15, 1974. Wichita police responded to a call at 803 North Edgemore Street and found 4 members of the Otero family dead inside their home. Joseph Otero, 38. His wife, Julie, 34. Their son, Joseph II, 9 years old. Their daughter, Josephine, 11. Investigators noted immediately that the scene was not chaotic. It was controlled. Ligatures, deliberate positioning. The phone line had been cut before entry. This was not impulsive violence. Someone had planned this with care. It was Dennis Rader's first confirmed set of murders. He had cut class at Wichita State that morning. Over the following years, 6 more people were killed in the Wichita area in attacks bearing the same signature. Catherine Bright, 21, was killed in April 1974. Her brother Kevin survived a shooting during the attack and gave investigators their first physical description of the killer. Shirley Vian, 26, died in March 1977. Nancy Fox, 25, in December 1977. After the Fox murder, Rader called Wichita police from a payphone and told them where to find the body. He wanted credit. Then came the letters. Beginning in October 1974, BTK mailed a handwritten letter to a Wichita television station describing the Otero murders in detail only the killer could know. He included a poem. He asked detectives to acknowledge him through a specific coded newspaper advertisement. In 1978, he wrote directly to KAKE-TV. How many do I have to kill before I get my name in the paper or some national attention? He killed Maureen Hedge, 53, in 1985. Vicki Wedrell, 28, in 1986, and crucially left DNA evidence at that scene. Dolores Davis, 62, in January 1991. Then he stopped. For 13 years, BTK was silent. During that period, Dennis Rader attended Sunday services. He ran scout meetings. He cited residents for zoning violations. He and Paula went to community events. Nothing suggested the man who had terrorized Wichita for 17 years was living quietly in Park City, roughly 15 miles from where his first victims had died. The Wichita Police Department had never officially closed the BTK case, but by the early 2000s, the dedicated task force had long been disbanded. The investigation had generated tens of thousands of documents and had followed thousands of leads. None had produced a credible suspect. What investigators did have was a partial DNA profile, recovered from the 1986 Vicki Wedrell crime scene. In 1974, DNA forensics didn't exist. By the 1990s, the technology existed, but database matching was limited. By 2003, investigators had begun exploring genealogical approaches to identify unknown DNA contributors, a technique that would later become standard in cold casework. Then, in January 2004, the Wichita Eagle received a letter. It contained details about the Wedrell murder that had never been made public. It included a photocopy of Wedrell's driver's license and photographs taken at the scene, photographs no one outside law enforcement had seen. The letter was signed BTK. He was back. Over the following 14 months, Raider sent more than 11 communications, letters, packages left in Home Depot parking lots, a cereal box deposited at a specific location, messages left at the base of a stop sign. He seemed emboldened. He was corresponding with a retired detective who had worked his original case. He was testing, probing, performing. A new BTK task force was formed under Wichita Police Lieutenant Ken Landwehr. Investigators worked quietly, carefully, publicly acknowledging communications to keep Raider engaged while building toward identification. In February 2005, Raider sent a message to KSAS-TV in Wichita with a direct question: could a floppy disk be traced? The station consulted with police. Then it communicated publicly that no, a floppy disk could not be traced. That statement was a deliberate deception. The disk Raider subsequently mailed to the station contained a Microsoft Word document. Embedded in the file's metadata were two pieces of information: the author name Dennis and the last modified location, Christ Lutheran Church in Park City, Kansas. Investigators searched the church's website. The Congregation Council president was listed by name, Dennis Raider. Within days, a court order was obtained for a DNA sample from Raider's daughter Carrie, who had provided a medical specimen at a Wichita State University health clinic. The sample was compared to the profile recovered from the Wedgerl scene. It matched. On February 25, 2005, Dennis Raider was pulled over near his home. He was 59 years old. He was arrested without incident. According to accounts from investigators present at the interrogation, when detectives told Raider that his DNA had been matched to the crime scene evidence, he did not deny it. He appeared, by several descriptions, almost calm. On June 27, 2005, Dennis Raider stood in a Wichita courtroom and pleaded guilty to all 10 counts of first-degree murder. He then described each case in court, the dates, the methods, the details, with a clinical detachment that left the courtroom silent. Victims' family members present described it as one of the most difficult things they had ever witnessed. His wife filed for divorce the day after his arrest. His children had no knowledge of what their father had done. Because all 10 murders occurred before Kansas reinstated the death penalty in 1994, Raider was not eligible for execution. He received 10 consecutive life sentences, with a minimum of 175 years before any parole consideration. He is currently held at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. The BTK case became a defining study in forensic psychology, not only because of the scale or duration of the crimes, but because of the specific profile of the man behind them. Dennis Raider is classified by forensic psychologists as an organized, power and control motivated serial offender. He planned meticulously. He selected victims deliberately. He controlled crime scenes. He returned to some victims after death. And critically, he communicated with investigators not out of carelessness, but as part of a psychological compulsion to be recognized. Dr. Catherine Ramsland, a forensic psychologist and criminologist who has studied Raider extensively and corresponded with him in prison, has written about his behavior in terms of compartmentalization, the psychological capacity to maintain entirely separate identities with no apparent internal conflict. In his civic role, Raider enforced rules and valued compliance. In his fantasy life, he sought absolute dominion. The two did not bleed into each other. The walls between compartments were solid. What makes Raider's case particularly instructive for behavioral analysts is that his public identity was not a facade he hated. He appears to have genuinely inhabited the role of church leader and community figure. He cared about the Congregation Council's budget. He invested in the scout troop. By accounts of those who knew him, he was earnest in those roles, not performing normalcy while seething beneath the surface, but actually present in those identities. This is what makes the case so difficult to process. The compartments were both real. His return to communication in 2004, after 13 years of silence, illuminates another pattern that FBI behavioral analysts have documented in organized offenders over decades. The need for recognition eventually outweighs the need for self-preservation. Raider had spent 30 years as BTK. He had never been caught, and yet invisibility, once a survival tool, had become intolerable. He needed the investigators to know him. He needed to exist in some acknowledgement outside his own mind. Raider himself, in a 2005 post-conviction interview, described the communications not as mistakes, but as deliberate re-engagement. He framed it in terms of a relationship with investigators. a dynamic that former FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit profilers describe as one of the more unsettling hallmarks of organized offenders with high need for dominance. The killer and the investigation become, in the offender's internal world, a dyad, a collaboration. The floppy disk question, asking whether a disk could be traced before sending one, has been analyzed at length. Some investigators who worked the case have said they believe Rader knew, on some level, what he was doing, that the question was as much a test of his own willingness to proceed as it was a practical inquiry. He sent the disk anyway. Behavioral science has no single clean answer for why someone capable of 31 years of concealment would accelerate their own exposure. What the record shows is that for Dennis Rader, being unknown, even while being feared, had stopped being enough. Cases like this one force a particular kind of discomfort, not the discomfort of a stranger, but of someone you might have known, the compliance officer who left a notice on your door, the man who led your child's scout troop, the congregation president who called a vote on the church roof repairs. None of those roles were performances, and yet they concealed something investigators searched for across 3 decades. If you find yourself asking how many other cases like this remain open, how many answers are sitting in plain sight, waiting for the right question, that's exactly what this channel is here to explore. Subscribe and don't miss the next investigation. Every case documented here is sourced from court records, law enforcement files, and verified reporting. No speculation presented as fact, just the evidence and what it tells us. Dennis Rader remains incarcerated at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Butler County, Kansas. He has given interviews to researchers and journalists. He has corresponded with criminologists. He has, by multiple accounts, continued the pattern of seeking engagement that defined his crimes, answering questions about his psychology with a thoroughness that researchers find simultaneously valuable and deeply unnerving. Carrie Rader, whose DNA, unknowingly submitted for a routine medical test, handed her father to investigators, has spoken publicly about the years after the arrest. She has described the process of building an identity entirely separate from his name, and of grappling with the reality that the father she knew and the man in those court documents occupied the same body. The 10 people Dennis Rader killed, the Otero family, Catherine Bright, Shirley Vian, Nancy Fox, Maureen Hedge, Vicky Wedgerell, Dolores Davis, lived ordinary lives in an ordinary city. They were not chosen for anything they had done. They were chosen because they were accessible and because he had decided they would be. What the BTK case ultimately reveals is not simply the story of a killer who hid behind respectability. It's a study in what we assume when we assign trust, through roles, through routines, through the ordinary texture of a life that reads, from the outside, as unremarkable. Dennis Rader was unremarkable. For 31 years, that was the most dangerous thing about him. SEOTAGS, true crime, serial killer, BTK killer, Dennis Rader, cold case, criminal psychology, forensic investigation, double life, unsolved mystery, FBI profiling, organized killer, Wichita, Kansas, murder documentary, psychological profiling, BTK documentary description. For 31 years, BTK terrorized Wichita, Kansas, and the entire time he was hiding in plain sight. Dennis Rader was a church council president, a Boy Scout leader, a city compliance officer, and a family man. He was also responsible for 10 murders spanning nearly 2 decades. This documentary explores the full story, the crimes, the 31-year investigation, the stunning forensic breakthrough that ended it, and the criminal psychology behind one of America's most chilling double lives. Featuring verified details from court records, law enforcement accounts, and forensic psychology research. 0000, the question that changes everything. 0015, Wichita's 31-year shadow. 0100, who was Dennis Rader. 0300, the BTK murders. What the evidence shows. 0600, the investigation, 3 decades, 1 floppy disk. 0900, inside the psychology of a double life. 1200, what this case reveals. 1310, final thought sources. Wichita Police Department court records, Kansas District Court filings, 2005. Dr. Catherine Ramsland's forensic research, verified news reporting from the Wichita Eagle and Associated Press. True crime BTK killer Dennis Rader cold case criminal psychology.